All right, we'll kick this off. I'd like to start the Watertown Board of Adjustment meeting for Thursday, September 6th. Need a call to order. Roll call.
Culhane.
Present.
Stein.
Here.
Dolly.
Here.
Hanson.
Here.
Dargins Johnson. Here. Ford.
Here.
Oletsky.
Present.
Olson and Kays are absent. We have a quorum.
And just to confirm, Jill, will both the alternates be voting today?
Today they will be, as long as someone doesn't appear.
Perfect. First item on the agenda is the approval of the August 23rd, 2018 minutes. Can I get a motion, please? Motion by Stein.
Second.
Second by Culhane. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Second item on the agenda is a conditional or appeal for 19204.
Application was submitted by Jamie Beebe Grandgard to create a 960 square foot non-conforming unattached garage by enlarging an existing legal non-conforming 576 square foot unattached garage with a non-conforming 384 square foot addition on the east side of said existing garage. The addition is proposed to be constructed 15 feet from the rear or north property line where a minimum of 20 feet is required. The existing 576 square foot or 24 by 24 unattached garage currently sets 15 feet from the rear northerly property line, again where 20 feet is required. Staff finds that the R1 zone parcel exceeds minimum area requirements for the R1 zone. There is sufficient buildable area on this 13,754 square foot parcel to build additional attached and/or detached garage space without variance. In addition to enlargement of a nonconforming structure with a nonconforming addition, the proposal also conflicts with the following ordinance provisions of the landscape ordinance. 217302 is applicability. This ordinance shall apply to all public right-of-ways and to all properties within the city without regard to zoning district or land use, with the only exceptions specifically noted herein. There are no exceptions for this property. 217305, Boulevard Public Right-of-Way Landscaping Requirements. The entire public right-of-way excluding the street in all zoning districts shall be devoted entirely to grass and approved tree plantings, except for the necessary surfacing of sidewalks and driveways. There shall be a minimum of 15 feet of width of grass adjacent to the public street, and in the event that there is not 15 feet of public right-of-way to be utilized for the planting of grass, the difference shall be met by requiring the developer owner of the property to provide the balance of the required 15 feet of grass on private property. The necessary surfacing of sidewalks and driveways may be allowed within that minimum width, 15 feet of grass. Non-living ground cover, including but not limited to rock, stone, brick, concrete, blacktop, or other like materials, shall not cover more than 10% when used as landscape material in the required 15-foot grassed area adjacent to a public street. And compliance, 7306, properties and rights-of-way in conformance with this ordinance at the date of its adoption shall not be altered in a manner such as to cause non-compliance with this ordinance. So this parcel lacks standard boulevard and infrastructure requirements such as trees, sidewalk, curb, and gutter, and this board has the authority to require fulfillment of any and all boulevard infrastructure requirements in conjunction with any structural improvements authorized by building permit.
Thank you, Jill. Is the applicant here? Would you come forward, please? And state your name for the record.
My name is Jamie Grandgard. Sure. Yep. My name is Jamie Grandgard.
Thank you, Jamie. So one of the things that Jill had noted here was in regards to the infrastructure improvement. Now, it does not appear on the overhead view that we've got here that the neighboring properties have sidewalk installed and the curb and gutter. Yeah, so it's not in the area at the time. Typically, in a situation like this, we do review these infrastructure requirements where they're lacking. One of the things that we always like to do is to get a waiver of right to protest should that infrastructure come in at a later date, that we would that you would at that time put that infrastructure in. We don't necessarily want you to install it on an island where it's not going to meet up with anything, but we do like to do the waiver of right to protest. Is that something that you would be willing to do if we do approve this variance?
If I understand correctly, you mean at a later date, if you require everyone in that street to put in curb?
Correct.
Then I would abide by that, yes.
Yep.
And keep in mind too, this is where the bike trail will be coming through.
Do we have a view of that, where that planned bike trail is going to come through? Can we pull that up?
Yeah. Unless Colin can come get it. Colin, do you want to use Jill's computer? Do you want to pull it up on Jill's computer? The bike trail plan? Well, it's on the south side of Parkview. Yeah.
Was the plan to do sharrows or something, or what was it? A resurface and put sharrows or something?
I'm not sure if they've even gotten that far in their design. They've just located where they're putting the trail on which side of the street.
Yes, we have not done the design. This will be part of an engineering project this upcoming year. This will not be part of like the actual bike project or bike trail project, because we're gonna make it one of our engineering projects.
As far as the design intention, would it be to put it adjacent to the road surface, since there is no curb gutter there
This
currently?
one, with limited right of way and how it has to go through there, the bike trail is actually going to be on the roadway in this location.
Okay.
So we are looking to widen the roadway a little bit on both sides, and at that point we would make enough room for a bike lane and 2 travel lanes.
I did want to mention while Colin's looking for this, that this will turn from, I'm assuming, I haven't talked to Jamie about this. I didn't give her orientation on this. I've just processed the report. But this will turn from a 24-foot wide driveway into the possibility of 40 feet, which is more than we typically give. There will be a garage door, another 1 or 2 on that side.
Yes, one
One.
more garage stall.
And that's not typically what we allow.
Oh, wasn't there a driveway there before?
I don't think it's a big deal.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wasn't there a driveway before, right, where you're gonna build the new garage? There is a gravel driveway. That it looks like it, when I look at the old county records, it looks like there was an attached garage to the house. And then when they did the remodel, but if you drive by, you can see there's something, it looks like an old driveway.
The garage was, there used to be an attached garage on this house, and it was turned into a family room at some point by a previous owner.
So that would be an existing driveway then? Just putting concrete on, I'm sorry, just putting concrete on top of the existing driveway, right?
That's for the engineering department to answer.
Yes, right there.
Yep.
And this is the current one. This is.
But you can see what it was.
Colin, did you say what the future width of the roadway is going to be, or what the expansion is?
That's not set yet. This is a difficult situation because of the driveways. We do not want to make every driveway non-conforming, not allowing parking in there. So we have to be aware and make the right decision to still allow parking there if sidewalk were going in, if it's even possible. So that's a design consideration we still have to figure out.
But currently, we only have 15 feet from the garage to the street right now, without adding a bike trail, correct?
To the property line.
To the property line.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference there? So what's the distance from the garage to the street? It looks like most of these garages are pretty much right in line as far as a setback from the road surface.
It's about 30 feet.
It's about 30.
What is he?
Jill, when you said that we don't normally approve 48 feet or 40 feet wide driveways, so are you suggesting that they couldn't make the existing driveway wider, but then they would, neck it out as you got closer to the garage?
That's typically what happens in town, is we don't allow the public right-of-way or curb cut to be widened, but on the private property, they can do that. They can put an apron.
So, right, so one option would be to approve the variance for the wider garage, but not include widening the driveway.
That would be an option.
And Jill, if I could, and planning commissions, if I could make one comment regarding the driveway. Jill did ask me before the meeting this evening on the driveway situation. Engineering does administer 36-foot maximum width on the driveways in town. And so in this scenario, I don't know what the existing driveway width is. I apologize. I didn't look 24. And correct me if I'm wrong, Colin, but we would still allow for a width expansion of the current driveway up to 36 feet. And then that could go out to the property line or the right-of-way line and then widen out even further at the homeowner's discretion to accommodate whatever parking pad or driveway they would want at that point.
And then would they be able to widen it? They wouldn't be able to widen it until it got to the property line at 15 feet from the garage, correct?
We would allow that 36-foot to extend out through the right-of-way to the edge of roadway.
But if they wanted it 40 feet or 48, they would not be able to widen it until it got to their property line, which is 15 feet from the
Correct.
garage.
So yeah, we're good with that.
Was it
Pull up the GIS.
when
Jill can-
when you're putting the addition on to the garage, are you going to have a separate roof line, or are you going to take out the wall that's on the west or no, the east side of the garage now, if I'm
We would
understanding?
like to take out the wall and continue the roof line out with the current garage.
So it will give the appearance of one structure when it's done, rather
Yes.
than, okay.
Was there any contact by the neighbors?
Jill, what did you say the setback would be on the other side lot? Would that still be 9 feet too? 9 feet on either side?
In this case, 6 feet is required for a side setback.
And it's proposed at 11.3 feet. Is that correct?
Let me pull this back up here. Yes, the existing garage sits basically 9 feet from the westerly property line, and the new addition would leave 11.3 feet.
So
to
the biggest
east.
issue is the front and back.
Yes, that's the only issue, and the enlargement of the non-conforming.
Because the lot is large enough to, if we push it back.
This is the picture of what Bonnie was talking about with the garage before it got turned into a family room. This is kind of a picture of current. This is no longer a garage door. It's now grassed.
So this is a silly question, but how did the garage get put 5 feet in the wrong place to start with?
In the past, this is a legal non-conforming garage. In the past, the building official apparently interpreted the inline provision that we have for the front of primary structures to include the rear of accessory structures in the past. We don't do that now.
And that's part of the reason we have this line of garages all in the same placement.
Correct.
Well, I don't like, I don't know, I guess you going to close the public or?
Did anybody else have any comments or questions for the applicants?
I could add one more point of clarity on the driveway. I did just do a quick measurement on the aerial map, and it looks like that 36 feet would bring it roughly to the edge of that existing gravel driveway that was that is existing out there. Just for your information.
Did you have any additional comments for the board before we close the public hearing?
I don't
Anybody
think
else
so.
in the
Thank you.
audience? I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Ask for a motion from the board for discussion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the garage addition and driveway to be 36 feet.
So a motion to approve with a maximum curb cut of 36 feet
36 feet or whatever is allowed in the,
in accordance to engineering design standards.
Would you be willing to entertain a friendly amendment that would include a waiver of right to protest?
sure would.
We have a motion on the table. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Motion by Bonnie and a second by Mark. Any additional discussion from the board?
Well, I will just make this comment for the record. I don't necessarily have a problem when, like you said, past history, we can't fix where the alignment was put. My struggle is that we have the space on this lot as we did the last time we had one at the lake, and we're not. I know that it sounds insane to move that garage back, but at some point we have to look at that, saying they have the buildable space to put it on their property without having to ask for exceptions. I just don't want that to carry through into new things that people are asking for when they have the buildable space. That's my struggle.
I tend to agree with you, Rhonda. I will add, because I have been in this particular garage, I have the advantage of knowing this. Not since you've owned it. That would be weird. But there's a pretty steep step down, and I think like a concrete wall embankment on the back, and it would be really difficult to back that out. I mean, you'd be talking about moving dirt. You're talking about probably ripping down the whole structure and then rebuilding it, and I just don't think that makes sense.
No, and I appreciate that. I'm just saying that it's just something that I think is a little frustrating. I find frustrating when we have the buildable space and we're not enforcing that. I guess that's all.
I struggle with that also, Rhonda, and at some point I feel like we have to draw a line, and it's constant, it's continuous, it happens over and over again, and it's, I guess we have these laws that are written, 1, 2, at least 3, with several subsections that we're not following. Once again, it's unfortunate. It's an unfortunate circumstance, but how do we ever work towards appropriate land use planning when we are overriding these on a regular basis?
I think that's a good point, and I think that's part of the reason that we really need to look at having a lake district to zone these things properly, because this district is substantially different than the other residential district in the town, and hopefully we're going to be talking about that a little bit later tonight in the comprehensive land use plan.
Agreed, but we're also talking a safety issue here when we're going to put a walking trail and you back out of that garage and I mean, I'm guilty of backing out of my garage and I'm in a hurry. I just wouldn't want some child to be riding by a bike or walking now that we're putting a trail on their side and we're just are getting closer. And nothing against this garage in particular. I'm just saying down the road, we just, at some point, we're just keep putting these garages closer and closer to oncoming traffic, and then we have people at the lake screaming at us because the speed limit's too fast. You know, we're in a no-win situation. That's all. You know, we widen that road, and we're only getting, you know, people closer to, you know, potentially being, you know, by the time you back your car out, they're right there. So I'm just saying, it's just something we really need to even think about going forward. The more we approve, the more we're going to have people coming and asking because the last person got it, the last person got it, the last person got it. And I agree, we all need a 3-stall garage because we all have too much stuff. So.
Any additional comments from the board? We'll take a roll call vote. Joe?
Hanson.
Yes.
Dargis Johnson.
Yes.
Ford.
No.
Oletsky.
Yes.
Culhane.
Yes.
Stein.
Yes.
Dolly.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Item 4 on the agenda is an open public comment submittal period. If there's anybody here that wants to address the board. Not seeing anybody hiding behind the pillar there, so we'll move on to old business. Any old business?
None.
All right. Motion to adjourn.
Make that motion.
Motion by Stein. Second by Hanson. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. You ready?
Yep.
All right. I'd like to call to order the Thursday, September 6th Watertown City Plan Commission meeting. Need a roll call, please?
Colleen,
Present.
Stein,
Here.
Dolly,
Here.
Hanson,
Here.
Dargett Johnson,
Here.
and Olson and Kays are absent. We have a quorum.
First item on the agenda is invitation for public comment participant submittal. If anybody's here to speak on behalf of the public to the board, we'll have a spot for that later on. Second item is an approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion?
I'm going to make an amendment to it to pull the new business of ordinance amendment procedure initiation in chapter 210209. It needs a little more in-house tweaking before we present it
Okay.
or discuss it for that matter.
We're
Do
gonna-
we have to move it to a definite date or not? How does that work?
That's a good question.
What's that?
The procedurally, do we have to move it to a definite date?
We'll just withdraw that from the new business. We'll still discuss the downtown overlay district in the new business section.
Yep.
So can I get a motion for an approval of the revised agenda?
So moved.
Motion and a second. All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. Item 3 on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the August 23rd, 2018 meeting. Made a motion.
So moved.
Motion by Liam. Second by Rhonda. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. And item 4 is meeting number 2 on the comprehensive land use plan.
All right, so now Luke will enlighten us. You can take it from here.
Glad you said that. Good afternoon. Thank you again. We are, as it says at meeting 2, going through your land use plan and just going through some information. You remember last time what all we went through, talked about. Here we're going to be talking more about, it's going to be a lot like a book report version today. It's more just looking at the town itself, and I'll get into that with that being the introduction. Obviously, I should introduce myself. I'm Luke Muller, Senior Planner, 1st District Association of Local Governments. Part of my job there, though I'm not doing that today, is that I serve as a zoning officer for Kyanning County, as well as working with many towns and counties with their land use plans, zoning ordinances, and anything else with the word plan in it. I'm also the president of South Dakota Planners Association, and for the last several years, we've been working on this land use plan. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to recap. I'll spend just a couple of minutes waking us up with regards to what we talked about last meeting, and then and ask for anybody, if you got any comments and thought of something you want to talk about with regards to that, let's put that toward the end of this discussion and talk about it at the end, or even I see something on the agenda for the old business we could talk about then as well. And then we'll talk about reviewing the document. So before I go to the next page here, I guess I won't either, in just a moment. Last meeting, we talked about some of the simple things, the introduction, the planning, the process we followed. Went through a lot of information about demographic trends, census information, American Community Survey, where it is, why we had it, and then talked about some of the goals, policies, objectives, as well as current and future constraints, be them infrastructural or environmental. You remember how we came through some of that, and there was some suggestion about trying to refine some language about floodplain into there, as well as the potential for, I think staff was going to work on some potential typical sections or some model local streets as well that weren't just the version we've come to expect or have in the past. So those are some things. Was there anything that you remember from last time that you wanted us to talk about later on today, or do you want me to just dive in and maybe you'll remember later?
And Luke, I do have a summary that for old business, then I'll go through the list just so then Plan Commission can formally approve that they're good with those additions to the comp plan.
Yeah, that way we're not playing volleyball with those ideas. I think that's a good idea. So we'll wait till down there to discuss any of that. So Good news. Well, let's move on to what we're talking about today. And today what we're talking about is the existing land use of the developed area of the town. The existing land use review, let's face it, a lot of what we've done in the past with our land use plans, and we talked about this in the last time, is that we spend a lot of time looking outward. Our future growth is going to be in the outer areas. To be honest, from a future land use planning, that's probably the sexier part, the part that we know less about. It's someplace that we can just go to, and it's really simple. Realistically, we're looking in the mirror when we're talking existing land use. We gotta look at some of those things we don't always like. Sometimes it's variances we issue, sometimes it's things we got to work around, and that's really what we're talking about here with the existing land use. Categorically is how we've usually reviewed them, and what do I mean by that? That's the type of land use that you've got: your public, your quasi-public, your commercial, your industrial, those sorts of things. And generally speaking, that's how we've looked at things, to have proportions. We've got this many people, we've got this many acres of parks, therefore we should plan this many more acres of parks because we've got that many people. That's nice, it's helped, it's done very good for service. What this version of this land use plan does is it not only looks at that categorically, but also spatially. Where have we been putting those things? Where are we lacking some of those things? And where can we expect those to go into the future? And so what we've done, it took it into primary land use types in the categorical review. It identifies proportional information, and then it also did get into a little bit of detail. Just because I can't help but stick a map into every section, I had to have a few into the categorical review as well, specifically with regards to the public uses and the industrial. And then with spatial, like I said, we just go into where they're at and split them into different types. I'm going to start talking about the categorical review. This form is helpful really to point out, for example, you can see where we're at with our existing development in town. We have 2,083 acres used for residential development in town. That's as of when we're doing this. Where we got some of this information, I should point this out. This information provides a snapshot in time. It's as good as when we did it. We used the land use inventory dating all the way back to 2008, and then updated with building permits and other sorts of permits as we went through here. Used aerial imagery as well as building permit information to update that. Reviewed uses that are out there in order to get us to where we are. And again, this tells us how many acres we've got towards certain uses. This does not include roads or streets or rights-of-way into there, so just keep that in mind. You need to plan that you're going to add at least 25% on top of that for right-of-way within town. Generally speaking, you expect about 25% of land future development to go into rights-of-way. That's probably about where that'd be. So what this basically tells us is that it points out that for every 10 acres of actual development, we've got 2.5 acres used for residential uses, 7/10 for commercial, 9/10 for industrial, 3 for public uses, and about 3 remain kicked down with the can kicked down the road for future development, open space. That's what the vacant and egg space looks at. So what that tells us is we've got land that's waiting to be developed in that egg and vacant space that we frankly have to figure out how we're going to handle the zoning of that. It tells us about how much land we've got zoned. So if we're having disproportionate commercial versus residential development, we understand we're going to be sitting on that for a while, unless something drastically changes. In that section, you spend a lot of time, a lot of pages dedicated to public and quasi-public uses. A lot of that is because, frankly, that's the public aspect, that's the amenity aspect, and that's how we can serve our folks. Really what this does is it paints a picture of how the city's attempted through public and private services to provide for the health and recreation, something to do for folks that live here, as well as trying to provide an area for water retention, trying to heal the land as well at the same time. So it's really how we've handled things. Identifies in this section that talks about parks and recreation, which I'll go into more depth in a little bit. Schools split into the topics I've got listed there. Health facilities, where they're hospitals or clinics. And then public safety, fire, police provide some background as well into there. We didn't talk about, we did not talk about storm sirens within there, but it was another thing that could go into there, but we've got that within hazard planning as well. So with that, moving forward, in the Parks and Recreation category of this section, we've got things split into greenways and trails, parks, special use out for outdoor, special use for indoor, and public-private education. Public and private education seems pretty straightforward. I think most of you know what a school is and what a college is or a 2-year is. That's what that is. Special uses indoor and special uses outdoor. Those may seem a little bit odd, but basically the special use outdoor is a sort of park that you would go to and expect some sort of dedicated use for. Watertown Stadium, for example, is a good example of that. Allen Mitchell Field, the track, is a good example. People can go run on the track if they are into that sort of thing. Or you can have track meets there, coordinated events out there. That's what a special use outdoor site is. Special use indoor is similar, only it's inside. It's the sort of place you would expect you're probably going to have to pay to use, but it's still a public sort of a thing. The rec center or Prairie Lakes Wellness is something like that, as well as, say, the auditorium or something.
I had a question on
Sure.
that special use parks. The skate park that we installed in there, is that a city park? Is it considered a park?
It is. That would be a good example of a special use outdoor, and that is included in that outdoor category because it's included in the Cook complex.
Gotcha.
area in here. So
What's the designation between neighborhood and community park? I didn't really understand the difference between.
well, it'll be fun. I'll get to that in a little bit. Don't get too far ahead. Yeah, don't look behind the curtain here. I'll be there in a couple slides. Greenways and trails are the part that I expected a few more questions on, particularly because I used the word lacustrine, which is one that it's one that I learned in some level of schooling, I guess. But basically, greenways and trails are those areas, and it does not include all of those wetland areas or the stormwater retention areas that we have throughout town, but primarily those that are attached to parks and those sorts of things. The best example I can think of is within that stretch there, say in Eastwood's Addition, where you've got that greenway. And you're going to have, it's not necessarily intended to have water year-round, but it is expected that you're going to have some sort of cattails or orchard grass or some sort of wet grasses, we'll say, not quackgrass or your Kentucky bluegrass into there. And then it also includes the areas surrounding trails as well. That's what that portion is. This just here is a list of references, the areas in which identified some of those. Again, this is not all of the stormwater protection areas that we have. We don't have the Willow Creek ponds into here. We don't have a lot of those areas into there. But this is more some of the places that we see both park and trail, or trail and open areas where people would tend to congregate. Definitely is not comprehensive list of all those, but a listing of those. Going into the parks, back to your question, Liam, the neighborhood versus the community park. And I'm going to describe it in the non-scientific way first, okay? I've nearly 40 years I've been in this area, grew up just outside of town. I guess the best way I could describe the difference between the community park and the neighborhood park, the way that most people would think of it, community park is the one that I, as someone from Florence, would know that I'm going to. It's the one that you have things more than just a playground or something like that. More you would have community events at. City Park, Jackson Park, things where you've got something else going on that you'd have neighborhood events. McKinley Park, although people may not know the name of that down by Riverside. Bramble Park, things that you've got other things going on community-wide. They serve more than just the neighborhood. The neighborhood is, generally speaking, going to be a place where it's more commonly known by the neighborhood. Land use planner, I didn't know where Harper Park was until I had kids. The bottom line is that those neighborhood parks are ones that, generally speaking, exist out there if you live in one part of town, but you probably have to go find them. That's a layman's way to describe them, but the realistic standpoint is a neighborhood park is designed to serve the area closest to it. Community park is generally going to be larger and able to handle more population, more help. So,
Luke, can I take a step back, and you might at the end get there, but as far as applicability of this section of the comp plan, this is where it'll be important to review these parts when we're being presented plans with park dedication, and then to look in relation to what we have existing and the classifications of them, and then what we'd like to see or what's needed in that area.
so going to that point, let's go to the part where I say this will be applicable as your annexing area and dedicating residential land. You're exactly right, Brandy. That was the next slide. The main point on this previous slide, just want to point out, you can see acres dedicated to each of these parks, listing into there. The only one I guess I would go back to, a couple of them, the parks within the trailer courts you can see on the west side. Some of those are kind of, I'd call them quasi-public, but they are neighborhood parks. And then the other one that's on there that some may look at cross-eyed, that'd be at Lincoln School. That one's kind of a combination. They called it Lincoln Park. For the most, as you look at this, the rest of the schools are not included in this. Okay, the other thing that's not included in here, which is a good question that sometimes comes up, is, and I'll show it on here, Memorial Park isn't on here. The Sandy Shores is not on here. The reason those are not on here is because those are not city-owned. Tomorrow the state could decide that they want to make some money by allowing gambling in places, and Sandy Shores looks like a great place to do it. That park could be gone. We can't control it. That's not something we control. Not saying that that's going to happen. But bottom line is that we can't control those. These are the ones that the city owns. And that's why the Lincoln Park one is a little bit iffy, but it's also, it's kind of a combination there. The school ones aren't included in there because it's not a 100% time, but in the same breath, those are things we really want to work with the school on, and that's within one of the strategies into here as well. This slide here, I think, is probably going back to what Brandy had mentioned, and I think it's really one of the things you want to think about from a standpoint of parks planning, and I think that I've provided this since this portion of this was done to the Parks Department as they're reviewing information, that they want to keep this in mind. Look at the green table on here. Did some analysis to figure out with census block data to determine that right now, right around 94% of the people in Watertown live within a half a mile of a park. That includes about 95% of all children in town, and slightly less, obviously, of the adults. Flip that on its head, about 5% of people, 6% of people, I should say, don't live that close. So basically what I'm getting at here is that 95%, we expect 95% of us to be within a 5-minute walk of a park. That's basically what it is. Whether people are doing that on purpose or not, generally speaking, a half a mile from parks is generally accepted or planned to be a 5-minute walk, and that's more from emergency planning that I get that from. So as you're thinking about that in future planning, that's where Brandy made that point, is that we either need to make the conscious decision that that's too close, that's too far, or that's about right as we go forward.
Luke, is there any data, as far as a community standard on what percentage of people should be within that range, or other communities that you've looked at?
I did not come up with that, but generally speaking, that's the second part of this slide.
Okay.
The map on here shows that half a mile, and I didn't just randomly choose a half a mile, but generally speaking, the half a mile is what's used as a service area. It's not a universal, but in the same breath, that half a mile is a lot of times what you look at. So what you're looking at on here is that when we first developed as a town, you look at the cluster there. Realistically, I think it's safe to say that the intent there, the expectation was that we were going to have a park in every quarter section, which would double up. We'd be talking about more like every quarter mile, not every half mile of having a park at that point.
Which brings me to my question. With River Ridge up there, and now the new development just off of 14th that isn't drawn on your map there, no parks on either one of those new developments that just went in?
There is a park to the north of 14th for Valley View, and then we are still working with River Ridge on getting that park dedicated.
So on this map here, it's showing existing parks. Again, existing land use as of the time. So, but it is a good point as you're doing this.
And now
And
that
that one
Valley
is
View is
dedicated.
annexed, we probably could add that.
It's a dedicated park now.
Okay. So in those instances, so you've got, and there's equipment there now, or
There's not
It's just
going to be,
dedicated.
it's park dedication, and I don't know that there's going to be any equipment there, but it's a place where people, bike trail goes through there.
yeah, so that's more of a greenway by the definition of what we've got on here so far.
Which one are you referring to?
The one in Valley View,
Valley View.
Valley View's park.
So my frustration is, I think everybody on this board is in favor of the park dedication, but it seems like our park board does not always want the land. I mean, what's the happy medium for? My frustration is I feel like once we've given up the land for dollars, we're on the losing end. But it seems like through either budget or what have you, the park department is always not, or the park board is not always welcoming additional parks.
Well, not only that, unless I'm mistaken, we've had stuff coming from in front of us that we have approved with certain park designations, and then by the time the Park and Rec department gets done with it, it's a whole different deal.
Well, it's not the Park and Rec department, it's the park board that has the discretion. And when we present them to Plan Commission, then we do relay your wishes to the park board, but it is their decision, not that they are going against what you guys are saying, but in times where they, as far as maintenance costs and size-wise, that's why maybe they would take the cash in lieu, but I think as a community we are we're going towards accepting the land.
Well, I think part of it, though, I think there's a little bit of, yes, they have the ability to choose whether or not they want land or they want money, but the Planning Commission and the City Council have the ability to choose the location of those parks. And when we approve the plats and the master plans, if we're dictating that a park should be there, I don't think the Parks Board has the wherewithal to say no, they shouldn't have that. If we go through the discussion and the discourse that the Planning Commission makes the recommendation to the City Council, and then the acceptance, we approve the preliminary plat, and when the plat comes into the City Council is approving the plat, so they're buying into the same aspect that this is the proper place for a park. Then that should be part of the capital improvement planning process or what have you, and then everybody should be going lockstep together.
One of the other issues that always comes up is the ongoing funding that's required when we acquire more parkland. I mean, that'll never change probably, but
You gotta mow it until it's developed, and then you got more maintenance. One thing I wanted to say out loud, I haven't really even announced this, and I'm not sure when's the appropriate time. Last year, Brandy went to maybe it was this year, went to the International Planning Association conference and saw a presentation on parks and communities, and told me about it. And there's an initiative across our country to have every neighborhood, every home, every residential place in our country within a 10-minute walk from a park. And I signed up to be a mayor in support of that concept. And I am in support of that concept, and it's a little bit different than a park within a half a mile. It's probably closer to a quarter of a mile. But I personally think a quarter of a mile is a more appropriate spacing to have a neighborhood space that's dedicated for, whether it's for taking your dog for a walk, throwing a frisbee, or having a playground or a ball field. They're all different scale. It doesn't have to be a uniform boilerplate across the board, but every residential location should have space within walking distance, public space, I think. That's my opinion. And I think this probably is the appropriate time if we're going to adopt a comp plan to see if the community agrees with me. And then if the community does, maybe we need to say that in our comp plan.
Mm-hmm.
And if the community doesn't, forget about it. But I feel very strongly about that. If you want to live in a town, there should be a place for recreation nearby every single residential location in our town.
Well, and I think this map reflects that has generally been the case, that we are within walking distance of a park, playground area, not generally an open space or something along those lines, along 14th Avenue or the dog park or the soccer fields out by the cemetery. That's not what I'm talking about, but actual a place that has other things other than just sitting and walking around. I mean, things that you can do there. And so I think whether it's a half a mile or it's a 3/8 of a mile or it's a quarter mile or it's in a walking distance, that's kind of all subjective to being who's doing the walking. And so I think we've been going on the right path, I think, as a community. It's just something we just need to continue doing, and whatever that standard is.
We should say it, and it should be in the comp plan, and we should have a statement that expresses that so that everyone can be on the same page. As a community, we've adopted this, so our park board is in step with our plan commission.
Right.
Those are two different boards, but they should be, having the same vision. And, they'll have different thoughts. They are thinking about the poor park department that has to maintain all that extra land, and they do not want gullies and undevelopable pits that are, leftover pieces in subdivision areas called parks, because on paper they're just a rectangle, looks like an okay place. Then you get out there and look, it's like, that's a park. That's not the kind of park that we want. We don't want the unmaintainable, unusable remnants of development. So it's, I would hope to see the Plan Commission and the Park Board not at odds with one another, but in concert and looking for appropriate locations. And this is great. I like this. And I think we need to have a statement of purpose. Maybe there is one. Is there one?
Nothing specific in it. That was going to be a question I was going to ask.
Yes.
So
Let's do that.
You guys are way ahead of me on those questions.
Absolutely.
I have one more comment on that. With, we talk about those smaller lots, and if we ever get that development off the ground, a park the size of Nelson Park or Highland Park up there with, like you said, activities. I mean, there's tennis courts on both of those, and playground set. You're not just going there to, sit on the rock. You've got activities. If the lot sizes are smaller for those families,
there's more of a need.
They don't have the room for a swing set in their backyard, perhaps. We have to have that incorporated. I would like to see that kept in mind if we ever do get that affordable housing development going, that a large park in that area would be, a massive asset to something like that.
It would be. And if you look at other communities, they have walkable scores. We don't do that here. And we probably will 20 years from now, but let's think about that, because that is a selling point for people. Look at that. And it's important when you're looking at living in a community to be able to have that walkability where you can get to places.
That's a good point too, because this is great seeing this up on the map like this, but the half mile can be a little misrepresented where it crosses over a major road, for instance, and you don't have a good pedestrian path to get there. So a walkability factor is definitely something to consider.
I was going to make that point too. Is it a state highway, or frankly even 14th Avenue could be just as impassable as the river itself, or at least I would hope to heck that it is for my 6-year-old. I hope he's not trying to navigate his way across 212.
Yep.
So yeah, that's exactly right. That was where I was gonna. That was one of the points I had highlighted, is just because a circle crosses Highway 212 doesn't mean you're serving those people south of 212 with the park on Nelson Park.
I think it would make it significantly harder to make your map, though, if you were to account for all that.
It would.
So is it something that we want to look at
I
as
don't think so.
tightening those radiuses to a quarter mile?
Well, maybe it's a stage thing. Maybe I think you have to differentiate between community and neighborhood parks. I mean, maybe there should be a community park spacing requirement, and then within a neighborhood park, it's something a little bit different.
Well, I think a community park would easily qualify if you're looking for at least green space within a walking distance. Then that would be a smaller. I mean, you wouldn't rule that out. That would
No,
be a thing
what
to
I'm
circle.
saying is what we need to, I think we identified what community parks are and what neighborhood parks are within the land use plan. And if we identify what a community park is, to me a community park would be something like Highland Park, something along all those lines, Diamond Ball, Belmont, some of those things. A neighborhood park would be like Harper Park or the one over here, just over by the Masonic Temple. I mean, some of these smaller parks that aren't. And I think if you understand what I'm trying to say is that I think we need to, if we're classifying our parks by what types of services those parks are providing, then we talk about how far should those be from people, and then community parks. They're not going to be every quarter mile or every 3/8, but they need to be in areas that can accommodate. And then what's the standards? A community park. What are the transportation requirements that you need to get to community parks and those types of things?
Yeah, can you get there?
Well, whatever we do, I hope we don't overlook the the kind of the disconnect between, again, what I feel happens at times with the Planning Commission, where we designate the park area and then it ends up being something else. We need to close that gap, and something, certainly getting in step with each other, but something more where we hope that the park board does, follows the recommendations of the Planning Commission and the City Council. I just think that's a disconnect that we need to, take a closer look at, somewhere along the line.
And I think maybe too, it's there maybe should be some sort of a policy that drainage ditches don't necessarily qualify for parkland. I mean, I know they're incorporated lots of times in part of that, but even at Highland, there's a drainage swale. That goes
It's a
through
green
Highland.
space, not a park.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
But it is. I mean, you can have a trail going through it, or it isn't necessarily ruled out to being a public space available for people to utilize, and you don't have to always have an organized sport going on for it to be.
Yeah, but if there's no trees planted around it, if there's no trees planted in the
No,
middle
I
of it,
agree.
it's a bowl.
I agree.
It's a bowl. I mean,
I
let's
agree.
call it what it is. I mean, I'm not going to go up and romp around by the Christian school south of 14th Avenue and in that area out there. That's just basically a drainage ditch. I mean, you call it what it is. I mean, it's not a park. That's not a park. If you're going to see, you need to see trees. You need to see activity. You need to see things going on. If we want to just, I can go out north of town and sit in a pasture and get the same sort of aesthetic
Most people
feeling.
don't even know that's a park because there's nothing there to indicate there's a place. There's no park bench or something.
And if
to
it's
go sit
raining
on.
every week, it's soft and wet.
What about Dakota Commons? As that develops east, is there a park designated in that development? Do you know?
I don't think so.
Which,
Good question.
Well, they had a big common area. There's a common area in the middle of that development.
they're a PUD, so all of their rear yards have lesser setbacks because then they have the green space behind them. But I was just trying to look. That's why I missed that question. Watertown Christian School, that drainage, that's not a public park. 'Cause that's their soccer field.
The Lutheran
yeah.
High School. Right. That's not even city.
But that's
property.
it's a large scale example.
Yes.
We take that and you can just go everywhere in every development where we have required detention
Right.
facilities. Most often or not, sometimes they get co-opted into park space, even though they're not technically a park, but they sometimes get taken as part of the park dedication requirement in some places, and and that's a practice I think needs to
end.
Right.
So there's usable green space.
From the standpoint of this, this study, or if we do one at a quarter mile for neighborhood parks or whatever it is, what's the reason that we wouldn't want to look at the school properties? They have jungle gym, playground equipment. They're often used as a neighborhood park. Would we want to include them in that?
I think we should, actually.
I mean, I personally would consider them, and I know we've gone and played at most of them, with our kids.
The only reason you wouldn't in a plan like this, and it's to a degree what I described with the not having total control
You can't
over
control it.
It's that there are times a day where they're not.
Well, and it would be.
I'm not necessarily welcome on that property at certain times of day. I probably shouldn't be out there wandering around when everyone else, and that's just the way it is. But it's, in all reality, though, it's a part that you see them in some, you don't see them in others. And so I wouldn't have had a problem putting them in. It was just a matter of, as we start doing this, kind of wanted to see where these fit in first. Sure.
Well, and then, again, our Grant School that has now been sold or partitioned off,
Right.
we have no control, and what at one time was, like you say, playground basketball court is now up for public sale.
Unless we put some sort of a recommendation in the plan that just talks about that, working with the school district to identify areas where we can work together on siting. Maybe they have a playground there, but maybe it becomes part of a larger park, something like Lincoln School or whatever, where there's a larger area that the city could access and use a portion of those grounds.
Well, it kind of jumps out at me because when you look at the map and you look at the areas that don't fall within one of these radiuses, over in the McKinley district is one of those areas. And McKinley does have a nice little playground on the school site, and I know a lot of those kids in that neighborhood use it. So.
Right, and you don't see Cook Complex or the skate park or Foundation Fields in circles.
Mm-hmm.
And kids walk and use those.
Yep.
You identify those as special use areas?
Yes.
Luke?
Yep. And that was where one of the goals within there was that as we develop those special use areas as well, that they should be coordinated with other equipment that people not using the softball field, for example, can still do something out there. And that particular area in the southeast is a good example of a place that really does need something in that area to go with it. Because that's the same example I just described. Just because the circle comes across to the south doesn't mean it's an easy walk to go north up to Morningside Park.
Can we consolidate all of the parks and their radiuses in one map? Just when we're using this document going forward, that it's just, then you can really have a good picture of what really is there.
To show all of the different types of park onto there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we could with all of the properties that were on there. I'm not 100% sure. I may have had that map and just not had it in the document because I think I had 85 maps. But yeah, it would be something that we could do with a special use or the
I'd like
outdoor
to see
things
them. I'd like
as
to
well.
see either both maps, because I think this map really shows one thing because it's a different type of thing. If we're talking other recreational opportunities or all recreational opportunities that are park related, softball fields, hockey rinks, those types of things, that could be one map. But I think this is something that's more specific to when we're planning as a planning commission, looking at development and subdivisions where parks should go, not necessarily where the next skate park should go in a neighborhood. So,
But don't you think it would be beneficial to see where some destination parks are too, just to have different colors and they could overlap?
I'm fine with that. I said I'm fine with having everything on one map, but I think this map is a standalone map as well.
Yes.
Because it's more of a
But
planning
just
tool.
another map that could consolidate.
Yes,
the two.
agreed. Yep.
Luke, did you think that you were going to get asked for more maps than you already had in here?
I was sure of it. I knew that you were the ones that like maps more than me. Please make this longer. That's what you were thinking. So, a couple of things that came out of this as I'm looking at this. One is make sure that we've got a map that indicates all parks. Okay. Two is going to be that you're going to want some sort of a number that says it's our intention that no portion of a residential development be more than either blank distance or blank minutes from a park. And that may be commercial, or not commercial, that may be community or neighborhood. I'm not sure if we're going to get down to that specificity. But the bottom line is that those are a couple of points that I've got down that we need to come back with. Filling in what the X is in that is going to come to you. But for now, we're going to get that language ready, and then it'll probably be one of those last things. We'll have a few of those to knock off.
And then I think another just a goal statement that talks about working together with all departments and boards within the city to promote park and recreational development. It could be as broad as that, and then we know what that means.
Don't you think we could just follow with the mayor's initiative of saying a community park or a neighborhood park should be a 10-minute walk for every resident and a quarter mile? Could we come to that conclusion, or what do you guys think about that?
I'll look at what I actually signed up for and tell Luke.
Yeah, please
you
do.
Can write it that way so that it's consistent.
And
And we
we'll
don't
bring-
have to do what the nation pushes. We can do whatever we want.
I'm old and a little bit overweight, and I think I could walk 3 blocks in 5 minutes.
Boy, I was thinking the
I
same
think
thing.
10 minutes is too far for, 8 and 9-year-olds that want to go play. That seems far, but 5 minutes is good.
You know your drive time.
The only addition, the only suggestion I have is that maybe the definition includes something about not having to cross them. I don't know, maybe use a major arterial or whatever your fancy street words are.
Whatever those are anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We're still in the works on
And
getting that figured out.
Back 12 or 14 years ago, we did a sidewalk study for the city that talked about pedestrian, and one of the things that we did in that study, and it was never fully adopted by the city council or the planning commission, was at least to identify those areas of interest where generators, schools and parks, and making sure that you had adequate public pedestrian traffic ways, sidewalks or trails, primarily sidewalks that are handicap accessible within at least 6 blocks. That was what we used back in 2002. Was that we wanted to make sure that these are the areas that we should be focusing on in sidewalk development as we retrofit the city.
So
And it was like 6 blocks within some of these specific areas, parks and schools were
There,
some
that
of
it
them.
would have complete sidewalk facilities.
At least on one side of the street.
Within 6 blocks
At
of
least
the
on,
park.
at least
or
on one side of
school.
the street, yeah. That was something we had talked about back then. I don't
good.
know, we've been redeveloping, and I think some of it's been happening, but I don't think it's,
We should incorporate those things,
Right.
and that was already adopted, wasn't it?
no, the city never adopted the sidewalk plan. It was done, we went out, this was in 2002, we drove every sidewalk in every place where there should be a sidewalk with a 4-wheeler and GPS those points throughout the city, identified all the curbs that weren't handicapped accessible, laid out a plan for long-range cost estimates to put sidewalks, and at least in those areas that we called primary collector routes and within specific service areas where you would have a sidewalk on at least one side of the street. And but it gets back to that 6 blocks, which would be a 10-minute walk type of a deal there. So I mean, we're in the same ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
since we're on the topic of that, and I'll take the chance to harp on this again because it's one of my favorite topics, but we don't have pedestrian walkway to Lions Park, which is a major safety issue in my opinion. But that's something that you notice in a lot of the areas around town where we don't have good pedestrian walkways into the parks, even once you become adjacent to them. So, Highland Park doesn't
We don't even have sidewalks on some city parks.
Exactly, and that's what I'm saying. You may have sidewalk up to it, and then once you get to the park area, there's no more pedestrian.
Yeah,
way.
that's kind of an oversight on our newer parks. Well, where our ordinance says the subdivider needs to provide sidewalks on both sides of every street, and then we defer it. We allow it to be deferred until the homeowner builds a house on it, and then they put the sidewalk on, and then, no house here, this is a park. They should not be deferring the sidewalk on that part of the road next to a park. And some of the development agreements have caught that, and the newer ones.
Yeah, because what ends up happening then is you got people walking in the street for that
Right.
stretch of road, and that's what we see on 3rd Avenue right now with people
Right.
going over to Lions
And
Park.
that is
so.
in the plans, Blake, just so you know, the 3rd Avenue.
I know it can't get here soon enough.
I know. Well, we're hoping to rebuild the bridge, and then at that time, there will be a sidewalk across the river, because that's really narrow, and there's no place to walk but right down the road in the lane. And so we'll connect it up through and order it in where there's private property to have connectivity.
Will the plan be at that point in time to go to the east as well,
Yes.
past Muth
Mhm.
and into the
Right.
development? Okay.
Well, that's exactly how I saw that discussion going. So, I did expect quite a bit on that. Well, I was hoping. If you've got good data and good information, that was really the goal here. This is something we just haven't seen. We haven't done something like this, and I know it's something that a lot of people have asked for, so I'm glad we at least got closer there. This is just a listing and acres used for special use parks, indoor and outdoor. You can see that the bulk of that land listed there includes the wellness center as well as the Boys and Girls Club. Outdoor areas, you can see where a lot of those are. You got Bramble Park Zoo, but the bulk of that includes the golf course into there as well. It counts for 25% of that area. You can see those. You don't need me to read through all of them to you, but
Do we want that, though, to be the whole parcel? Like, for instance, the Premier Softball Complex. Most of those 75 acres, which are it's actually 60 acres, most of those 60 acres are not ball field. It's detention pond and leftover floodplain land south. Do we want to just include the Premier Softball Complex area itself? Or all of the
I think,
land
Madam
next
Mayor,
to
what
it?
we did was when Luke was doing that, he just took the
whole parcel?
the parcels.
Exactly
for
right.
the-
Right,
as
but is
oppo-
that
as-
what we want?
As opposed to cutting out the
show?
parcels and adding additional work. I think it was the
Yeah.
easiest way to
it was,
say
a,
this.
it was a matter of work, and also, in theory, if you do own that property, you do have the ability for kids to go out and catch frogs, I guess, like we're going on the other parks, I guess. So bottom line is it was from an ease as well as trying to figure out where it is and where it isn't. So that was the best possible way. It just tells us how much is there for now.
One special note, Luke, on the draft on page 70, you referenced the soon-to-built recreation facility north of 14th Avenue.
I already
so-
fixed that. I
okay.
fixed that this afternoon. I noticed that too.
It just
Good. Never
it just-
mind. Oh,
it
that's
just
new.
it just
Okay.
goes to show you how long we've been working
Mhm.
on this. So
So and so we'll have a few changes in mind there. We're done with parks. There wasn't really much about that. That's good. I'm glad we had those discussions. Doesn't mean we're closed on that. But let's get through some of this other, and we can bounce back if you want to hit the highlights. We can get back to parks again too. But let's see where we can go from here. This next slide just indicates the types of residential use we've got in town. Of course, this is categorical still. A lot of detail goes on farther on as you read through it. The bulk of our residential development is obviously into single-family residential. 85% of the residential development is for single-family houses. What was interesting to me is the area dedicated to multiple family and manufactured homes is actually more for manufactured homes than it is for multifamily, which surprised me a little bit. But nonetheless, that's where the land shakes out right now. Commercial, and again, there's more data to come on this, but this just is a breakdown of the amount of acres we have of commercial development. Again, the types of commercial development go back to that land use grab that we had in 2008. Did update some of that information as we had it. Generally speaking, they remain about the same as far as proportions, although it may be a little bit more as we get closer here. But again, that was the most recent detailed data that we had. But we've got 609 acres of commercial property. in town, 7.32% of our total developed area. I spent a little bit more time in this draft with industrial uses because the industrial uses got slighted in a couple of those other reviews as far as the commercial and the residential area reviews. So the next map you're going to see, what we did is identified the industrial parks that were out there and the percent developed. Not necessarily the percent owned, because a company may own them and plan on expanding at some point, but the percent currently developed, and didn't call it developed and undeveloped, but basically developed and underdeveloped. So if they're using it for outdoor storage, it's something that could be developed if need be. The point to that is if someone offered a wad of dollar bills to someone who didn't have something else planned for it, they would likely be interested in selling that. That's just an assumption out there. But really all it did in this, and I've just got 2 slides that show about the same thing, the amount of land in that area, and that just was used combining the parcels, and then the amount of acres open, parcels that aren't used right now. And so that's where the percentages go, percent occupied versus percent available. And then this map just indicates where those are. Green areas on this map, and please note must have been a second draft of a map because the legend does not match the actual colors on here, so that'll have to be updated. But the green areas would be what I referenced as underused, and the pink would be used.
Luke, did you also look at information and data from the Watertown Development Corporation, information research on industrial park availability? And
we did to a degree. We used that as background on it, but the standpoint of future growth is where that was used more, because a lot of that was outside of this area. But it's a good point, though. It was used as the assessment, so it did dovetail a little bit. Yeah. So there's more information, of course, in the draft itself. There's a paragraph description of what's going on in each of these developments. Specifically, this industrial park is used for heavy industrial. This one is used for more contractor shops and yards, that sort of thing. So a little more description.
I think
about
probably the important thing to think about, though, is that within these areas where you see green on the map, it may look like there's a lot, but there really isn't a lot of land. I think if you were to talk to the Development Corporation or those people in the know, there's lots there, but some of those lots don't really connote a good use for heavier industrial type uses, if that's what we're going to be looking at. We are very light on I-2 area property in the community. And some of those areas just, while they look like we got land, it's just it doesn't have the things that the people are wanting to see: access to rail, certain water and capacities and sewer capacities and those types of things.
That's where these 2 slides together, the information there, work together, because if you just look at the total area available, you think, wow, you add all these numbers up, we've got a lot of acres available. Well, we really don't, because if you look at the map itself, part of it's spoken for and looking for a use, but other parts are just flat out in smaller parcels, and you'll hear from the Development Corporation there may be while that may work for some businesses, it doesn't work for some things that they're looking to attract, or they may need to be, as Todd had mentioned, that they need to be closer to rail or certain types of roads. And that's where some of this has been opened up. Of course, we have opened up some more land to the south as well in that as well. So
on that, on the industrial one, you don't have a total like you did on all the other ones. You did total commercial.
Yeah, let me look at that too, because I don't think I do have a total line.
Yeah, if you could
those.
on those, just because.
Yeah, that's a good point. There was one classified as, quote, other. I did note there were 12 plus an other. 2 properties I really couldn't classify as being anywhere else, and they're primarily out toward Highway 20 and some of that area that was planned for industrial development back in the 50s and just kind of had some scattered development that got cut off by commercial development in some other areas. So that's where the others came from in there. But I didn't want to leave them floating out there with no real explanation. Had to have words. Didn't want them to feel slighted. So that covers our categorical review. I'm not planning on spending as much time on the spatial review, but if we want to double back to it in the future, we certainly can. I'm basically just going to go through slides and look at them because they're basically show and tell is what it amounts to. Okay. I'll do a brief introduction here and point out the spatial review. This is where we pat our back on doing this, is that this is the first time this sort of a review has been done since 1968 in town. We haven't done a spatial review like this. And again, part of that is because just looking in the mirror, it's not always fun to look in the mirror. The other part is it's just not convenient either. And in this case, we weren't focused on that in the past. But this is really what you see on a day-to-day basis when you're wearing your Board of Adjustment hat. And this is the sort of thing that the staff would really, if I were a staff member, I'd want to have something that I could go back to and say, see, it's our intent to do X, Y, Z in this area. At the very least, that's one from a standpoint of issuing conditional uses and variances, as well as updating our rules, having smaller lots in areas and things like that. So, sources, you can see where we did it. Split these into regions. Again, geographer, the recovering geography in me calls these things regions. They're portions of town. They're neighborhoods. Elementary school districts is what we used, as well as Lake Compesca as a redevelopment area is what we called them. Split the review into quasi-public and public review, so split that down a little bit further as far as what's going on there as opposed to just park, open space, that sort of thing. Got a little more in depth in those. And then took a look at residentially, what is the population, what is the population density, what are the lot areas, and what is the occupancy status. We looked at lot area because it's logical to believe that your lot area is going to be, if I got a smaller lot, I'm likely going to have smaller setbacks. And so that's where you're expecting to see more of your variance requests if you've got small lots. Occupancy status, that's where you're probably going to have some conflicting land uses and expect some things like that as well. So I'm really just going to flip through these and point out your general land use by type on these maps that you're about to see as I flip through them. If someone says, hey, hold up, what was that in that area? Go ahead, tell me. But yellow is residential land use. Green is public or quasi-public. What's a quasi-public? A quasi-public is a church or a private school or a civic organization or even a publicly owned or a privately owned utility is a good example. So blue is commercial and red, you'll see in a minute, is industrial. You can see in the Jefferson area there is no industrial. In what would be the Lincoln Elementary School District, there's a little bit there. You can see where it's at, open areas that are out there. You can see the standpoint or when we were doing this, some of that development on the eastern portion of Eastwoods wasn't into there. Going on, here's McKinley. You can see where the industrial development is there. Millette and Roosevelt School District. And then lastly is Lake Compesca. You can see on Lake Compesca it's primarily yellow with just a couple of blue areas, and then the green is really takes up a lot of the area. The public quasi-public uses, and this is just going to be flipping through them as far as where they're at. Identify where there are parks, where there are civic areas, as well as things like City Hall, fire department are identified differently, and so on through there. And you can just see where some of those are. You can see the green spaces or retention areas are identified in brown. You've got the airport is shown in that pink in there. And purple is the schools, the public schools that is. And so on through there. You can see I've put some of these together on this one. This is Lincoln, and then McKinley and Millette are on this first slide. On the second slide, it's got Jefferson, Lake Compesca, and Roosevelt School District, just to show you. Basically on here, we got a lot of public stuff going on in these areas. That's really all. You're not gonna know the answer just by looking at these slides. It's in the plan. Residential land use type is the next map that you see in each of these areas. The areas in yellow are single-family residences. The areas in orange are multifamily. That's anything 2 dwellings and up, like a duplex and up. And the brown is manufactured homes. So just in going through here, you're 3 into here right now. Jefferson top left, Lincoln is the top right, and then McKinley is the bottom right. Next slide, Millette Roosevelt and Lake Compesca. Really, I left the scale as wide as it is because there's very little multifamily or manufactured homes on Lake Compesca. As you look at that, again, that's within the plan. And then one more that I've got is these smaller maps that jump out a little bit more. The population density maps. The density, it may not, there is method to the madness on the legends and the colors that you see on here. That's Cartography 101 that I taught many years ago at SDSU. But basically, as you look on here, yellow would be the development that would be if you assume that you're going to be 9,000 square feet for a residential lot, what our ordinance, what our R1 district says. You take out 25% for roads, and then you figure 2.5 people or 2.4 per household. So anything in yellow would indicate that they're following about what our R1 district would say. Green is going to be less. They've got more space. Anything that's orange to red is they've got less space per person, okay, if you figure our average household size. So as you go through these maps, you look at them, you can see why you've been issuing variances or having conditional uses going on into there, especially when you look at your
mostly in that southeast and southwest part of town.
Exactly. And then as you look at this, for those of you that know your floodplain maps really well, you can tell that your floodplain map covers an awful lot of the map on your left, your Roosevelt School District as well. So those are a couple of things. Residential lot area, I'm really not going to dive into. You can certainly dive into this. I'd be happy to talk about it, but this was a really telling breakdown. If you look at Jefferson School District, a lot of yellow on these maps. Green, above 9,000 square feet. Yellow is 6,000 to 9,000 square feet, more the R2A district. And then red is below 6,000 square feet. The ones in red in the corner there, those are duplexes. Those are platted R2, nothing to worry too much about. Whereas as you get down lower in the red right in the center there by Park Street, those are actually zoned, they might be R2A now, but before they were zoned R1 not too many years ago. So gives you an idea. You roll through, there's Jefferson, here's Lincoln. You can see initially when I went through this, I was planning on having 7 school district areas and then one for the lake, and the 7 would have been Old Garfield and Old Grant. But it was redundant to do that because it just shows up abundantly clear where Grant and Garfield School are, especially in the Lincoln area. You can see where Grant School used to come in this stretch, crossing 81 here in between 8th Street and heading west. So that kind of gives you an idea there as to where some of that came across. McKinley, you can see where you've got your smaller lots, actually pretty good compliance there. Let's go to Millette School District and to Roosevelt School District. So you can see that really the line on a lot of this, say in Roosevelt area, is 11th Street. It's actually not 11th, it's 10th Street. I had kind of, before I started this, expected it would probably be more 81, but it wasn't. It crossed all the way over to 10th. So gives you an idea of the lot sizes of what you're dealing with. You see a lot of red there. So, I mean, even if you're using that R2A district, you're still going to have a lot of stuff crammed on top of each other.
The other aspect that causes a lot of that issue, and we're going to talk about it later during the R2A discussion, but it's the shape of the lots as much as it is the square footage of the lots, especially when you're talking setbacks. So you can see there, those are long, narrow lots compared to the much more square-sized lots in the newer R1 districts.
And what you run into on these is you look at them, I hate to say it, I mean, look at the red areas on here, and if we go back up to this one too, notice they're all in about the worst spots they could be. They're all on corner lots. It's mostly all carriage houses. I mean, you see a lot of these that were split. There were areas that used to be turned into what was a carriage house that was split off into these things. And so split off, hey, this is a nice garage, so we split that into 2 lots instead of 1. And now, great, we got 2 front yards we got to deal with. So it's things like that you're dealing with. And those are the things. The whole point here is we're doing this This is a stretched out version of Kempeska. The whole point here is that we can start to put, we know what our town, we know what our demographics are. We start to know what our lot sizes are. Okay, now we can see what the problems are. When this whole thing gets done, that's the whole point. The unique things that we've got here, well, those are things that we have to address within our land use, within our internal look and our redevelopment areas with those sorts of things. The main thing I want to point out here is that this is lot area, not necessarily platted lot area. One thing I noticed as I looked at Lake Kempeska, and this is stretched out, you don't see a ton of it, but we actually have a lot of now compliant R1 lots that actually have enough lot area to them as they're getting owned more and more. We used to see where it was individual lots and it was 50-foot wide lots, and to a degree we do still have them, but we actually have more compliance than we would have expected. And I'm just going to flip through here on occupancy status. You can see owner occupied is yellow. The pink is tenant or rented. What did I say? Blue is owner occupied. What did I say? Wow. There are those that say I'm not right all the time. I don't know who they are. Blue is owner occupied, and the pink is tenant. Gives you an idea. You can see where our owner occupied is as you go through here. What you see in here with the tenant is you do also see, say, Millette School District is a good example of an area where you're seeing conversions to multifamily out of old larger houses. Here's your Roosevelt School District. You show a lot of tenancy, but again, don't forget a lot of this is floodplain as well. So as we've got floodplain into there, it does look like a little bit of making the most out of what's on there too. Lake Kempeska was an interesting thing to look at. I was interested to see how that's changed from when we annexed this to now. Honestly, the owner-occupied versus tenant is very similar. It is arcing more toward owner-occupied, but not as much as I had anticipated as we looked at it. So, in the end, we had unique land use issues into there that we found within there. Jefferson, there really wasn't a ton that was different. It was actually complying with, because it's relatively new, complying with a lot of what we've got in our ordinances. Lincoln School District, we see a lot of campuses, and we see a couple of campuses and small lots. We forget about the fact that technically a dormitory is not allowed by our ordinance, yet we have several dormitories in town. How'd that happen? And so the point is we have to account for campuses into there, be it future expansion of Lake Erie Tech as well as our Christian school. McKinley, we've got the airport to work with, which is also some sort of a campus, as well as small lots. Millette, we've got the hospital, which it's got its own campus, as well as many small lots, topography to deal with, and conversion of single-family units. You can read on here, Roosevelt's got the floodplain, small lots, mix of residential types, transition between residential and non-residential. There are many different commercial districts that go across that Roosevelt area, so trying to transition back is kind of difficult as well. And then lastly, in Kempeska, we've got accessory uses without primary structures becomes a question. It was one that was brought up for quite a while. We spent several meetings talking about that several years ago when we first started talking about this. Non-conforming structures as far as where they're located. And we've got several commercial uses in areas that are identified as ag or ag zoned, and then the utility capacity that we run into. So those are just a few of the bullet points into there, into that portion. And then the last part was some of the commercial properties, and I'm not going to dive into it too much, but within that there's also information review that was more, it was more of a delve into form-based zoning and questions is what it amounted to. We reviewed the general area, general development pattern, existing transportation network, pedestrian-oriented transportation, parking area and landscaping, signs and building materials. Again, a review of form. Everyone from Watertown, and frankly people that just drive through, know that the northern portion of 81 does not look the same as the stretch between Broadway and 10th Street. Yet they're zoned, well, I guess maybe they're not zoned the same, but maybe Willow Creek Drive is zoned the same as that stretch, yet it doesn't look the same. We've done things to make that on purpose that it doesn't look the same. Uptown looks different. The point is, there are areas that are zoned the same but look different. Let's identify, let's stare those things in the mirror, and that's what happened within that, is talked about some of the things that you see, generally speaking. That was done by a windshield survey, does not detail, but talks about generally speaking this and that is going on. You can see the areas that were split, and some of those, for example, the area on Highway 20, it's split into subcategories as well, because the area up by the old North Sale Barn is not the same as the area down by 212 and 20. Same thing, the area by the Old Memorial Hospital is not the same as the area by 14th and 81. I stole an extra 7 minutes from you. I'm happy to talk more, but I wanted to at least get a chance to get through. We can bounce back to other things.
I have one thing I think the Plan Commission should weigh in on. I noticed you use the term uptown. If you look it up in the dictionary, it means like the residential area up away from your central business area. And a downtown is your central business district. And I know this has been kind of a debate in Watertown, what do we call it? And people thought calling the downtown uptown would make it classier and give it a little more hip. And
Thank you.
What should we call it? I think that's a wrong term, saying that downtown is uptown. But I don't want to start a war or anything.
Madam Mayor, if I might. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Coincidentally, Brandy and I just had this discussion prior to this meeting on a non-related note, looking at our zoning ordinances and how portions of them may or may not reference downtown and or uptown. And our discussion is more based on we should have a uniform term no matter what it is. It should be uniform and consistent throughout the way.
We might want to be uniform with the universe.
Exactly, and that's where my discussion with Brandy led is along the lines of what you just described, where I think the uptown was kind of a catchphrase that communities have used to kind of enlighten the hype and the vigor and the energy in a downtown area to try to not necessarily revive it, but keep it alive and just give it a different perspective from other communities' downtowns. And I think that catchphrase over the years has kind of misconstrued what the technical definitions of either might mean.
Right.
From a planning standpoint
when
and a zoning
people come
standpoint.
to Watertown from away in other parts, they want to see your downtown. They don't want to see your uptown. I mean, that's residential.
It was a marketing ploy back in the 70s.
But I think we should be consistent. This would be a chance to. We should probably go through our zoning ordinance.
How does the chamber, the development corporation, the urban renewal board, how do they brand themselves? Because that's what you're talking about is branding, right?
Well, before you dive into are we uptown or downtown, I want to get into briefly the point here of at least this portion. Okay, this portion here, looking at the regions here, we've never marketed Central 81. We've never marketed SD Highway 20. The bottom line is this is colloquialisms is really all it is. It's in quotes for a reason. That's not saying we don't need to discuss it, because I actually that was a part of what I kind of wanted people to talk about. I had initially had the Magic Mile area called the Magic Mile +1 because it's an extra mile. It's not the Magic Mile. It's actually another mile off of it. The point is that, yeah, fill in the blank on what those are. I wanted to at least defend the idea as far as where it came from. But the idea is that these are commercial regions. They're sub-regions within your town. And so they are going to be unique and different. They're going to have their town name. They're going to have their name. Uptown may need to be called downtown. That's fine. But it's really, from this standpoint, it's more of a colloquialism, just what you're going to use to describe that area that we do that and how you differentiate that. I'm happy to change any of these. That's actually a goal. But
growing up in Watertown, living north of downtown, we called it downtown. Mm-hmm. If you were living south of Kemp, you probably called it going uptown because you went uphill.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's more than that, though. I mean, a community's downtown is a phrase used universally across our country. Everybody knows what it means. It's the central business district, the center part of your town. And I don't know why people think that's negative, but
I know.
apparently people think it is.
I think
of downtown.
I think everybody's largely in agreement, with the exception of a few stalwarts. But I wouldn't mind to kill the term and kill it with fire, and purge
Take a
it
stand.
purge it from the document. I'm gonna reveal my clandestine nature. I was gonna ask that you just Control F and replace all of them via email, but since it came up, I agree. We need consistent. It needs to be consistent in ordinance, but it also needs to be consistent marketing, and needs to be consistent in planning and zoning. So,
I think the charrette.
Control F in our whole ordinance book too.
The charrette, that process, talked about the downtown.
Yeah.
I
The
think
charrette addressed it, and
the H220 processes have always talked about it as being a downtown area. It's part of you get into the whole new urbanism aspect. I mean,
Right.
it's basically what you call it.
I agree. We don't want confusion if they're going uptown or downtown. So, and I think downtown is more appropriate.
Well, if could we just call it close to Skaggs? Is that something we could? No, we don't do that anymore.
There's not a lot of. There's some people who don't know what that means.
I know.
The headlines tomorrow are going to read downtown.
Close to Skaggs.
Close to Skaggs. Okay, good to know. We've got that. And if as far as any of these others, nothing in stone as far as any of the, as I said, they were in quotes for a reason. It was a guess.
But this really is more to show
that is
the
a bigger
snapshot
question.
in time of what your city looks like.
Yep.
It's the base model for where you go from here, and that's the next conversation.
It is. So what this really did is set the stage for here's the stuff going on here. The next phase is recommendations as far as how to address the stuff going on, redevelopment within these areas, the challenges that we face in those areas. The redevelopment areas, the area inside of town, a lot more specific. We have a lot more specific items. Outside of town, they're specific as well to the areas, but there's also some generalities into there too. So really, the next phase of our discussion is going to be recommended policies. It's going to be future land use. I kind of tricked you by saying there's only so many pages to look at, but there's also about 100 pages of maps on the back end too if you really want to sort through them. But you really do need to, because those are the future land use maps that we went through day to day with the Planning Commission back several years ago on the outside part of town. The inside part of town also definitely take a look at. So obviously the whole thing.
Would you say for the next meeting to break it up a little bit so it's not then, so we have time to review how these redevelopment areas are already structured while you're going forward and looking at what the future land use should be, to maybe break it up to page 136 to 160 for the next meeting?
I would say that it would be logical, if you want to avoid having an hour and 15-minute conversation, that maybe we do just that. We do the redevelopment first, and then we do the future development outside second. I've got no problem with that if the board's okay seeing my face next year meeting.
Does that sound good to you guys?
My dad was on the city council and named Highland Park, and now I can step out of my garage because I live in the vicinity of Highland Park. So this is a fabulous discussion. So
Great.
But that goes back to 19 whatever. So I enjoyed this particular session.
Thanks.
I do have to say that's probably my favorite park in town. I kind of live right in the middle of the cluster of all those up on the map, but
Step out of my garage and in 4 steps I'm in Highland Park.
it's a beautiful park.
It really is.
It's one of the best. Really a gem.
I don't
Luke, I
presents
have
out
a-
there anymore, though I used to.
I have a question, Luke, for you on your residential parcels.
Sure.
And I'm just kind of a numbers girl.
Mhm.
You have residential numbers on all of these, so I suppose if I added those all up, that would tell me how many homes are in Watertown.
It'd be how many lots to have homes in
Okay.
Watertown.
And then if I wanted to know how many of those are home occupied and how many are owner occupied and how many are rental.
There is a better way than to count them one by one on there. Let's just put it that way.
No, I know, that's why.
But it could be done, yeah,
Um,
with the same data.
The only reason I'm going there is because of this affordable housing issue again. I'm curious what the ratio is. That's where I'm.
Of
that's the
owner
only
occupied
reason.
in town versus
Yeah,
owner
the-
and tenant?
Right.
Yeah,
Just
that-
curious on that.
You know, years ago in 2004, when we went through this exercise before, had the benefit of having some really good census data that tracked incomes, and so we were able to compare incomes to housing types, and it kind of matched up what we all thought was going to be, but we don't have that data anymore. They don't collect that with the census anymore.
The other thing I should point out is that going back to 2 weeks ago, we referenced that a housing study was conducted in town. So it's not. I think that housing study is probably 4 years old now as well. But at least we do it. There's 4-year-old data that's pretty detailed. That was detailed there. But from a standpoint of owner occupied versus tenant occupied, that actually is something that, I mean, this map here that you see on here, as far as here, is one of my favorite maps. Yet it was actually relatively simple to make. So it's something that could be looked up if you need to. I know someone you could call. This is owner occupied versus tenant. It's just I cut out the areas that weren't the specific school district so we could look at one at a time when I did it for the plan.
I just think if there's a board that, you have going, I just think that would be something that is, if you can spit it out quick, it might be something that would be interesting.
Thanks, Luke.
Thank you, Luke. I did have one note too, if you just want to make a note on page 124 regarding the one-ways downtown.
Good catch, Blake.
So I don't need to control F anymore. That's all of them. 2 of them.
I don't know if you just strike that note about them being one way on Kemp and First Avenue. But.
I got you. The there's also another place in there in your next set that'll have that too.
Say, Luke or Mayor, will there be any more information coming on this convention or the thing in Huron next month? As far as, will we have an opportunity to go to that, or?
I did. I sent it out, but yours was the one that was declined, so I need to get a different email address. Yeah. It had 11 megabytes, and you only had 10.
Did Stuart shut your email down already, Mark?
Go figure. Something I put together had too much data to send out. Too many pictures, I guess.
But again, I think I would encourage any of you that has the opportunity, even if it's just for part of the day or part of the session. There's going to be some really interesting speakers.
Did you further explore whether or not you're going to be able to stream?
We're going to be talking about it. I don't know that we'll live stream it, but I think we'll probably do a recording that we can do and probably have them on a USB or something like that. Do it that way. I got to talk to the rest of the board, but that's kind of my plan. I debated about the idea of a YouTube channel or not, and I'd rather have the ability to wait to see if it comes out or not.
So yeah, if you guys are interested, just let us know as soon as possible, and then we'll get rooms booked and registrations done. So
Sounds good. The next item on our agenda is the discussion of the R2A single-family attached residential district front yard setbacks. See, we have one of the pages in the agenda, or in the packet. Did you have the file to pull up any of the other ones?
let me see. Because it was in Excel. You had
Yeah.
a PDF and an Excel format, right?
Probably. this has been pushed a few times now, but I think tonight was actually kind of a natural time to talk about it after seeing that land use, the existing land use, especially considering the lot sizes that we saw in this older section of town.
I think this is actually the old illustration. Yeah, it is. I'm not logged in. I don't know if I can get my email or not. Do you have
You
the
can
PDFs?
go to this though. I think the only difference was that I added the labeling for adjacent lot, street, alleyway.
Okay.
So is there?
But it was just this one sheet, right?
There should be more to it. Is this the R1?
It'd be
Yeah,
on
there
my
should
email.
be R2A as well.
Can I get on my email here? Unless I go and send it, if I run upstairs and put it on here. I don't know if there's. Do you guys want me to do that?
Do you guys want a visual, or should we just talk about it?
It doesn't matter. I mean, I've seen that. That's the stuff that you had.
Yeah, we had the handouts before. I mean, the thing that we need to talk about is the fact that in the R2A district, we've got these long, narrow lots. And so when you look at the total amount of buildable area that are on those lots, it becomes exceedingly small. So the visual that we've got here is an example of the R1 lot. So this is any lot that's new in the town. This is the standard that we expect to hold it to. So the top being a corner lot, the bottom being an interior lot. And you've got different setbacks according to, whether or not you have a corner lot or not. So corner lots, of course, have the 2 front yard setbacks. So you're going to have less buildable area for the same lot size. Looking at the R1 district, this is an example of a minimum lot size that you would see there. And the total buildable area is the kind of the green part in the middle. The dimensions are down below that, so it's 35% of the total lot versus an R1A lot of 9,000 square foot. Below that has a buildable area of 39%.
What was your numbers then on those 6,000 foot R2As?
So you get down into the R2As, the typical R2A lots with a 48 foot wide lot, 150 foot long, and you're looking at 40 to 50% buildable area for an interior lot, which makes sense. We don't see as many setback requests for the interior lots, but the corner lots, they're down into 20, 25% in some cases lower than that, because we've got a 25-foot setback. 25-foot setback on a 48-foot lot, that's more than half of it right there on the one side. Then you add another 6 or 9 foot on the other side, and doesn't leave you a lot of room. So the question was, do we do something different with the setback requirements on that secondary front yard? Do we treat the secondary front yard different from the primary on the R2A corner lots?
Didn't you already have a recommendation on that you submitted?
Yeah, I've got some language drafted up, and I mean, we could look at it in either way. I mean, I'm personally of the opinion I'd probably be more flexible and go down to like a 15-foot, as long as they're accessing a garage off of an alleyway or something versus the street.
But if there was a corner lot and the garage accessed the street, you'd still keep it at the 25, or would you?
Or 20 maybe.
So where at least the car wasn't going over the sidewalk.
Right. So Randy, down below there on the the worksheets. I think I had a couple different examples of an R2A. So there's R2A 2020, so this would be what it would look like if you had a 20-foot setback for both the primary and secondary, leaving a buildable area there of, what, 36%? So that's roughly in line with what we're doing on the R1 lots. Of course, you know, this is a lot smaller lot, too. So the buildable area percentage-wise is equivalent.
Yes, you'll have a smaller house.
Yep.
You still have an equitable amount of buildable area.
But there at least you got it, so 24-foot wide buildable area there in the center of that lot. Or there's another alternate, so 20 and 15. So go to the next worksheet down below. So if we had a 20-foot primary front yard setback and a 15-foot secondary setback, you're up to the 44% buildable area. Maybe scroll down just a little bit. This compares to, go to the interior lot, 55% buildable area.
And that would be where you would have to have alley access, is what you're thinking there?
Yeah. Which most of these lots do in that section of town. That's one frustration, you know, that they have currently, though, is their neighbors got, you know, 55% buildable area on their lot, and some of these guys have got, you know, 20%, 25%.
So what are you proposing?
This is for discussion at this point. I put two alternates in there, one with the 20-foot and 20-foot, and one with the 20-foot and the 15-foot. So 20-foot primary front yard, 15-foot secondary front yard.
But we don't ever classify with primary or secondary. It's just frontage. But these will just be for corner lots with double frontage, correct?
Correct. Yep. We do have other language somewhere in the code about primary and secondary front yard. I don't know exactly where, but I've seen it.
You would say the primary would be the front door?
Yeah.
Is that what you're thinking? Where it's addressed off of?
You know, a lot of these houses, you look at them and they're definitely designed with a primary front yard.
I just, if I may, I guess you've listened to me long enough, but I just, well, I've seen in other places and seeing around, albeit some of the smaller towns, but I am seeing in smaller towns where they're just acknowledging the old development. A lot of them have gone to some bare bones on what you're calling secondary fronts as far as setbacks and going more to a lot coverage, which I anticipate in some other parts of town as well. Is the primary question aesthetics, keeping things in line, or are we more worried as far as that larger setback just so that we've got enough clearance for vehicles to get out and or park in front? Because if we're talking about the primary, the direction that the front door faces, that's not always the same way that the garage door faces, especially on a corner lot, because that's what we're seeing. So if we mean we want the garage doors to be at least 20 feet away from the right-of-way, let's say that, regardless of what it is, and if you are okay letting the house be closer, then so be it. But if whatever the thing you want farther back, let's just flat out say it that way, whether that's in a definition or whether it's just here.
Yeah, and that's where I was thinking you could probably be, you know, more flexible on the side yard where it's accessible from the alley.
And we do have different setbacks for which way the garage is oriented.
Mm-hmm. But we always treat that second front yard as a front yard setback.
Yes, yeah.
I think the place that you're thinking of primary and secondary being mentioned in the ordinance is the new storage ordinance. It does mention where you can put RVs, and we call them primary and secondary, but it isn't really setbacks.
That is probably where I saw it.
But yeah, just as far as, I think for consistency, we would want to just, you know, if we're going to give them a 5-foot leniency because this is a retrofitted district, that maybe it would be better to just call it 20-foot front yard setback for both fronts. Then you can get a vehicle out without being encroaching within the sidewalk, in theory.
Or could we still do 15 and say as long as it doesn't have a driveway, as long as you're not accessing it from the street?
I'm comfortable with that.
The thing is, you know, where an addition starts, it turns into a garage or an overhead door at some point. Things just morph without building permits.
Then you just take them to court and you spank them. Do it a couple times, people will stop doing it.
Because that's consistent with what we do from a setback requirement on how we approach the garage, you know, from an alley. So if we have language that's consistent, you know, from approaching it from the street side and have different square foot or different footage setbacks, I don't think it's an issue.
And if we keep this in the R2A area, which is supposed to be like a closed district anyway, and trying to find and encourage people to redevelop and reinvest into their properties, making them not just rental properties but also owner-occupied structures. We know today that younger people like to have more space than probably. I used to live in that part of town on a 48-foot lot, and it was just a little bungalow place. Kids grew up in there, but the kids probably would not buy that house and start their family there today. So if you had an extra, 600-800 square foot of area that you could develop and build, you would maybe encourage people to redevelop and repurpose those lots as well.
But I think also the Clearview Triangle is something that we should keep in mind.
Oh, if you're 20 feet back on one side and you're 15 feet back on the other, you're going to hit that Clearview Triangle. You should, because you still got the boulevard in there as well that you're taking.
Do we classify it as the property line?
It is from the property line.
Well, on the corner lots, if you're truly measuring a Clearview Triangle, you'd be going to the center of the road, backing it up 50 or 100 feet, whatever, based on the speed, running that, and you would incorporate some of that public area into that Clearview Triangle, because then you're just penalizing the landowner. Because it's, that's on a corner lot, that's generally how you would measure that. Pick a predetermined point in this intersection, mark off a space that you feel so far 100 feet if that's at a 35 mile an hour. I think it could be 50 feet or 60 feet at a 30 mile an hour speed limit. Bring it back and you take that corner. You don't need 20 feet would easily make that clear view. And if it's especially or you could even do something even less if you want to talk about controlled intersections. You could even do less. Because everybody's supposed to stop anyway. And if we ended up doing this and we started reducing the width of our streets and long-term making those streets more narrower, it would slow traffic down and the clear view wouldn't have to be as great as it is.
But at least with the R2A won't see like a new development of a street necessarily. If a street project were to come through and we were going to narrow it, we would probably rezone as well. If we were doing something major like that.
If the city thought about long range, and if you're thinking about budgeting long term, and I have urban systems money, I'm going to be sticking money into a project, and I can start reducing 38-foot wide streets down to 28 or 32-foot wide streets, and we have more grass space, and we're going to take a whole 6 or 8 block swath at a time. Why wouldn't we consider doing that? Because in the end, it's going to save the city and the taxpayers money. They'll have less runoff coefficient, all the other things that go along with it, and you're getting the traffic calming that you want to do. I mean, that's really out there thinking as far as long-range capital improvement planning, and you'd have to do it basically on long stretches of roads so that you don't get the in and out effect. But something to think about.
We have to think about pedestrians too with the Clearview Triangle. You're talking only about the street, but there's also the sidewalk situation where the kid is going down there with a trike, and we've got somebody backing a car out of their driveway. So that's
Well,
also.
then we should stop letting people build fences in the front yard by their driveways as well then.
And even if you did the setbacks here, you're still subject to the Clearview Triangle. And that's not going to hit it, with even if you're at 15 feet.
Mm-hmm.
20 foot from the corner,
I
and
think
20 foot this way,
think
and
if
then
we-
you draw the hypotenuse. Is it going to intersect?
Heath,
I don't
can
think
you
it will.
clarify? Do you know? Does it just matter? Does it matter just by your definition and ordinance, or what is the engineering behind the Clearview Triangle?
Well, I think that Commissioner Kays described some of what the AASHTO has in their manuals regarding site triangles where speed is accounted for. I've found that at the municipal level, depending on the type of roadway that you're dealing with, whether it's an arterial or collector, they'll utilize those speed consideration site triangle calculations. But when you get more into the residential areas, Councilman or Planning Commissioner Kays is also correct that the stop controlled conditions come into play where they have guidance on that and how that site triangle's minimized quite a bit in a stop controlled situation. But I have typically seen municipalities will establish, like I understand we have. I haven't read exactly what ours is, but I understand there's a 15 or a 20-foot dimension that we pull. I'm not sure from what reference point, so I apologize for my ignorance there. But I do know a lot of communities will establish their own standard along those lines where they feel comfortable in considering the pedestrian traffic throughout the community and considering, safety turning the safe turning movements of the traveling of the traffic as well. So I think that in our engineering design standards that we're looking at adopting, we would definitely spell out clearly what our expectations are for site triangles, because that has everything to do with the design of a roadway geometrically in relation to the development of those design standards. That's one critical component of it.
Maybe what we should do is take an example of what Blake is proposing. Go find a dozen or 15 corner lots where we know that there are R2A, run the Clearview Triangle as it's being interpreted currently by ordinance, and then also say, well, what if we went this way, an alternate bring the engineers in to make sure that's kosher. But the Clearview Triangle, for most practical purposes, how this city has utilized it from a zoning perspective, not from an engineering perspective and the road and those types of things. But it's a setback for aesthetic so you can see around a corner, for all practical purposes, or backing out of a driveway. That's how we've utilized it. And so if a car is traveling at 25 miles an hour and an AASHTO says that we should be looking at a Clearview measurement from at least this point from the center of the intersection, take a look at that, and then just run some analysis to see, does that, what Blake's proposing, is that going to work? And maybe it works at 20, and then we're fine with what staff comes back with.
Well, and that's only, the 20-foot is only referenced in the sign code. So, I think that when we come up with the engineering design standards, that will be a good depiction of what we'll use to judge that when it comes to you guys actually, if we adopt it, then it'll just be permitted, so.
And I think if you were to go out and look for real examples in the R2A district, you're going to find that there's a lot that are even closer than the 15 feet. And that's part of the reason that this is such an issue, is because you can't allow continued development or redevelopment of those lots if we don't have any buildable area on the lot in the existing ordinance, specific to these corner lots.
Yeah, we tried. It was a pretty good lift when just the R2A got adopted, as far as reducing the 5 foot, the side yards and those types of things. Just it probably lessened some of the Board of Adjustment actions, because those are all a variance that everybody wouldn't say no to anyway on some of those old parts of town, because somebody was thinking at wanting to stick a few $1,000 into a property to add a deck or something, and no one wanted to say no, so how could we justify it? So we reduced those side yards and some of those front yards. But
the R2 that we're talking about is rezoning in existing lots, right? Or will the R2 be something
No,
that the
you-
developer will be able to use?
It's the
No.
R2A zone.
The R2A zone.
Would just be retrofitting, correct? I mean,
Yes.
what we're talking about, it's not going to be available in a new
Correct.
situation.
No.
Okay, all right. Brandy, where are the R2s A's right now? You are pulling them up?
Yeah. And, you know, actually, the street widths are, I believe, 80, a lot in these older neighborhoods too. This one's 70, so you are getting more boulevard.
And because those have such large street widths, the Clearview Triangle is a non-issue, I really think, from that perspective.
Right.
Because you can take that public right-of-way and incorporate that in your design, and you would be able to encroach that and still not be any more of a safety hazard.
That's what I was saying. You know, you're going to have some that are way closer than the 15 feet, and you would have never known because they're sitting that far away from the road.
Right.
The only caveat I would say to that is the person backing out of their garage over the sidewalk. That does go along the lines with what Jill had said, is that you have to get to a point where you can get your entire vehicle out to see both ways before you go, oh, I guess I ran over something. You
Right.
kind of got to figure that out first.
And that's why I think it's justifiable to have a clause in, you know, whether you're accessing on the alley or on the street, right?
Yeah.
And whether or not the street is a collector or a local street, I think is what Heath brought up would be also an important thing to think about. We wouldn't want, there are collector streets, 4th Avenue South, for example, that has a lot of R2A zoning, that we wouldn't want to be encouraging that on some of those busier streets.
Right. But even if they were to add an addition, that they could have a lesser setback if they have an 80-foot right-of-way instead of a 66-foot local street standard?
I think there's all good ideas. I think you have to do a little analysis to see how it would really shape out and whether or not it's worth the effort to go through the process.
I'd just really like to get to a point where we can be comfortable about we're giving these people a fair right to develop their properties, and it's not a unrealistic buildable area on it. And then we can be justified if we say yes or no on a variance request. But as it stands today, many of the ones that we've continued to see over and over again, I just can't justify saying no many of the times.
Maybe out of consistency, if we wanted to just lessen it to 20, and that gives us the back or the bearings to say this is the reasoning behind this is for a vehicle to be in a driveway, parked in a driveway without encroaching the sidewalk. And then if it still came as a variance, then those are things that you guys could look at and then justify why.
I would rather personally, again, I've been talking this for the year that I've been on the board. I would rather have design standards in place that we can all agree on that hit the ball triple 95% of the time. It's less work for you. It's less work for this board. It's less cumbersome for the public that we're trying to get them to come before us and not have to grovel to use their property. That makes general sense. And so if we can agree and if we can show that 15 feet without the garage is the use, if we make it 20 and they come in and ask for 15 and we start granting it, well, now you're back at the 15 foot again. We just lock it in and we say this is the situation. And that way you're not having to process paper. We're not going to have to process paper. And to me, I think I would rather try to fit it so that we're not having to go through the minutia of having people make special requests to beg to use their property and something that makes somewhat of a realistic expectation. That's just me.
We'll work to tailor some language.
I appreciate the discussion.
Thanks for bringing it, buddy.
It's something we've looked at time and time again.
Yeah, I definitely think, too, I mean, with the requests that you get, that it's good to take the initiative to change it and make it so you don't have so many requests like that. So.
And I think once we fix this little issue for Blake, we need to then, the next issue is fixing the lake.
Yeah.
Because that's, you know, we get those all the time, and it's hard to say yes and it's hard to say no to those situations. So let's try to figure it out so we're not seeing as many of those requests.
With that too, a lot of times, is that do they come up requesting where they want to put a deck is a deck considered that would have to stay 20 feet back also? So
Yeah.
that might be something that if it is a deck that is, that at least you can see through, it's not a solid wall, that might be just a no-brainer also, that, a deck would be something that could fit into that setback area, even if we left the setback at 20, that a deck is absolutely, permissible, because that's right. So just food for thought on that one too, that maybe the decks would eliminate a lot of the paperwork too.
Right. Sounds good. Good thoughts. Do you guys want us to tackle the lakes before or after daycares and home occupations? You guys are probably waiting to see those too.
Yeah, they're on the list, aren't they?
But yeah, this and Blake, thank you for providing all that research with your illustrations, and then that'll give us good basis to work from, and then we'll study some areas and see kind of what could work with this discussion too.
I think it helps to have a kind of a visual for stuff like that. At least it helped me when I was going through and looking at it, and it made it kind of jump out as a real issue.
And I think that would be part of the ordinance. Is the more that we can make our ordinance have visual components, so we know exactly what we mean by it. I think it's easier for the audience.
Easier to understand.
It's easier for the decision makers.
Yep.
Sounds good.
Item 6 on the agenda is an open public comment period, but we don't have any public anymore, so we'll move on to new business.
The TV ratings are through the roof, though.
Okay, so this discussion is about the downtown overlay district, and this is about what we've seen what we were approached with on the Board of Adjustment for downtown, and kind of what we'd like to see for aesthetics and requirements that maybe we want to implement to hold on to the historic nature of downtown and preserve it, and then as well as have guidelines for rehab projects and whatnot. So this would basically be similar to what the Gateway Overlay District is, and it would encompass the area of downtown, which is within the, what is that committee? Urban Renewal Board. So that's just open discussion on what your thoughts are, because it would be something that Plan Commission would have to initiate staff to research and explore.
There was some comments after the 2 conditional use permits were granted on the 2 downtown development projects that were talked about aesthetics and stuff, so I assume that's what this is regarding. I'm conflicted personally. I'd like to see, I'd like to see gorgeous brick buildings gone up or nice facades and stuff like that. The flip side is that I believe in incremental growth and slow progression, and I think it's difficult for folks to just build those giant buildings and build the facades initially. And I think there's part of it's a critical mass. We want some sort of development. I don't want to hamstring development or redevelopment in the downtown area. So those are my only comments on the issue. I think that we can do it within reason. We can promote aesthetics within reason, but I don't want it to be such a high bar that it extinguishes the redevelopment.
I think, one aspect is on the new construction going up, and that was an example, that we talked about recently. The other aspect is in preservation of what's already there, so and maybe there's a differentiation between new development and preservation of existing developments.
I would just recommend talk to the city of Sioux Falls, ask them what their design standards are for Phillips. If that's what you're aspiring to be, is to have at least a 2 or 3 block of Kemp Avenue. Maybe that's your Phillips Avenue, and what they allow and what they don't allow, and start with that, and then we can always dial it back. But I think downtown, uptown, if you're trying to encourage, something, to happen down there, again, I agree. You have to give people some opportunities, some flexibility, some staging or timing, but I know several years ago when they built the transportation facility over here that the city put together, and that building went up, there was a lot of consternation at the council level and from the public of putting that at the gateway of the north side of the downtown, and I think I brought up the questions with the last applicant. You know, I was thinking you had some development there, you got potential redevelopment there at that corner, and I was just concerned that we were setting a precedent for what was going to happen long term.
Brandy, what are the borders of downtown?
I think the Urban Renewal District starts on First Avenue North, down to First Avenue South, from Highway 81 over to 3rd Street West is a general area of it goes a little bit further to the south on the Urban Renewal District.
So just for a broad idea, anything in the pink that's Zone C1 is mostly the downtown area.
And the thing is, maybe what it is you have different design standards based upon the historical aspect of the building, or maybe certain blocks within that area, you know, where you would maybe allow tin buildings in some parts of the uptown. I'm not saying that that's inappropriate, but I think, you know, if you were going to take from the Woolworth building to the Goss, would you want a redevelopment where I'm going to put tin on the outside of the building there?
Well, there's where my issue starts, is tin on up downtown buildings. I would have rather saw any type of the drive-it stucco rather than tin on a building in that area. I think even the vertical siding would have been better than pole barn tin. Sorry, that's just not the place for it. You think of looking at those buildings at an industrial or a commercial, I mean, a manufacturer, not in our downtown area. And that was my issue with the gym being built. I have no problem. I think it was, you know, the spot is sitting there, not a problem, but I was really disappointed in what we allowed to be put on a facade on that.
Aberdeen's doing some stuff with their uptown downtown area, as is Brookings. They've now been doing some redevelopment strategies and being quite successful. And it's not the entire, but it's core identified areas that they're trying to look at. So I mean, we don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
Overall, I'd love to look at something, or have the staff look at something and get put together. Yeah, Aberdeen, Brookings, Sioux Falls, sort of a conglomerate of what it is that they're doing in terms of their overlay.
And if we put that together, it might be good to have some visual images to match with their ordinance. So if they've got specific language, also some images of how that looks.
Sounds good.
And I think generally what we'll find, and Brandy and I'll be happy to look into that in other communities, but I think generally what we'll find is in these central business districts, we will see a lot of communities that have put measures in place to prevent the tin siding, for example, type of construction. And some of them may, I believe, have focused on certain gateway main streets, and maybe not the entire downtown district per se, or in our case, this entire C1 district that kind of coincidentally outlines our downtown area. So anyway, we'll definitely look into those, and I think we'll probably find that that's probably going to be overwhelmingly the case, that is drawn up that way.
Good. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
We do have some old business, right?
Unfortunately. Okay, and this should be pretty fast. So this is just an overview that I just want your approval as from the last meeting with the comp plan, that you are all in favor of these revisions or additions going in. So it is make reference to our transportation plan should consistently be major street plan instead of what we had master street plan. So we'll have it consistent to say major. Revise the language regarding joint jurisdiction district between the city and county to state that the partnership between the two entities will continue within that district. Add the Sioux Rural Water and Watertown Municipal Utilities Judgment Agreement, and then as well as adding the Sioux Rural Water Territory map for reference to that. Find consistency with the DOT functional classification map and the major street plan. Add narrower street standard sections. Reference the city's engineering design standards as a placeholder for when those are adopted, and add CRS language to the floodplain section in the comp plan. So if anybody remembers anything else that should be added that you had on your list, we can add that to this list and then hand it to Luke so he can.
The only point I would make is
revise.
that there's nothing in stone as far as the rural water territories map that's out there. I think that the policy information is sound, but just to show a map would be difficult. So I guess I want to make
Isn't there
clear
one?
so that
There is a map.
there is a map of areas, and if you want to go from that, but it's a what's left map. So we could, if you want to have from the South Carol rural water providers use that, I suppose that could work. Just as long as it's available, that's all that I'm concerned about. Because when the area, long story as far as how they're established, but the bottom line is that's
There is no
often part
official,
of the
there's
problem.
no official rural water map for the Sioux Rural Water is what you're trying to say. For that
Exactly.
service area, it was never adopted by the state of South Dakota.
It just came along with that consent decree.
Yeah.
Bingo. So I guess my point is I think we can accomplish the point that we've got with the policy point. Is I guess my point.
Right, and then they can ask about it when they're annexing or zoning.
Exactly. The entities are aware of their territories, and from planning commission standpoint, it's probably up to the utility providers anyway. It's just our policy to make sure we're asking the question.
Sure. Do we need to take action on that?
We don't have a resolution number. I think maybe if we just.
How about an okey doke?
I was going to say a consensus.
Let's give.
Sounds good
the
to me.
The technical term is consensus.
Is everybody okay
in
with
favor,
it?
All together.
Yeah. Good.
Okay.
Thank you. Is there any reason for executive session?
Yeah, I think so.
Do you think so? Motion to adjourn.
Please.
Motion by Mr. Stein, second by Cohen. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Good job, Mike.